will start the translation now, so I will start a little bit in Russian, but you have a translation, and then it will be in English.
Мы в эфире, можно начинать.
Доброе утро, уважаемые коллеги. Я очень рада приветствовать всех на нашей конференции «Эволюция международной торговой системы», посвященной 120-летию со дня рождения профессора Сергея Ивановича Тюльпанова. Наша конференция проходит... Наталья Антоновна, включите, пожалуйста, презентацию. Наша конференция проходит в рамках 5-го международного экономического симпозиума на экономическом факультете Санкт-Петербургского государственного университета. Конференция организована кафедрой мировой экономики экономического факультета, и мы очень рады, что она проходит при содействии программы кафедры ВТО WHA Program. Центральное мероприятие нашей конференции мы решили посвятить актуальным вопросам развития международной торговой системы и обсудить их с нашими приглашенными экспертами и вами, дорогая аудитория. В нашей конференции доступен синхронный перевод, и мы решили проводить круглый стол на английском языке, поскольку наше мероприятие транслируется на YouTube, и английский язык позволит нам поделиться нашими обсуждениями с идеями, на самом деле, со всей аудиторией по всему миру. Наталья Антоновна, включите, пожалуйста, второй слайд. Какая-то, извините за проблемы со слайдами. So, we start our conference, International Trading System Prospects and Challenges. And I'm very grateful to start with the round table. Please, next slide. On the next slide, you will see the title of the round table, International Trading System Up the Down Staircase. So actually, Up the Down Staircase is the title of the famous novel by the American author Bill Kaufman. This novel was published in 1964 and was translated in many languages. It was extremely popular in the Soviet Union, and I honestly have read this novel in order to prepare for this roundtable. And I'm very grateful to Sergei Felixovich Sutyrin, who opened for me this very important and, to my mind, very relevant publication for nowadays. This novel actually opens many perspectives, and one perspective is how to be a good teacher. And yesterday I was greatly impressed by the discussion at the roundtable dedicated to the scientific heritage of Sergei Ivanovich Tюльпанов. It was the start of our conference yesterday, and the colleagues discussed the role of Sergei Ivanovich as a teacher, as a mentor for students, colleagues, and the society in general. Another significant idea of the novel is how to go up the staircase, facing the challenges of various policies and system imperfection, and how to inspire people to go up, even if it seems that the staircase is going down. The development of international trading system today is also facing challenges. Where to go, which steps on the staircase to do, in which directions and how. And today we offer to think on what are the future developments of international trade and international trading system, how to make international trade to encourage the economic development of the countries and increase human well-being. Natalia Antonovna, please show the next slides. I would like to introduce the speaker. So I am the moderator of this roundtable. My name is Alexandra Koval. I'm Associate Professor of the World Economy Department of St. Petersburg State University. And I'm grateful to have such speakers at our roundtable. So firstly, I would like to say about Sergei Felixovich, who is the inspirer of this roundtable. He's the head of the World Economy Department of St. Petersburg State University. He is the WTO chair holder And Sergei Felixovich does a lot and more than that in order to develop the Russian Research School in the field of international trade. In addition to his professorship at St. Petersburg State University, Sergei Felixovich has delivered lectures in various universities in Finland, Germany, Japan. He is the head of the Russian and many international research and educational projects and shares his expertise in publication made in various languages available for researchers all over the world. I'm also very grateful to introduce you to our invited expert, Professor Desiree Van Korp. Professor Desiree Van Korp is a professor of international business and chair of international advisory boards at Nijmegen Business University in the Netherlands. She's a visiting professor at the Polytechnic University in Milan, Italy, and Renmin University, China. She is a member of the advisory board of the World Trade Organization's Chairs Program, and she's also a supervisory board member of Atradius, Missing Chapter Foundations, and Young and Bold Foundations. So she's actively participating in developing their research and education, international business and international trade. She published her research results in very high-ranking journals. For instance, one of the last articles was published in the International Business Review. Then I'm very grateful to introduce you also Mr. Alejandro Gamboa Alder. He's a senior trade specialist with the World Trade Organization at the Market Access Division. He is responsible for the Council for Trade in Goods and the Committee on Import Licensing Procedure and technical assistance activities on customs issues, trade facilitation, tariff negotiations, rules of origin. He also has taken part in the trade facilitation needs assessment activities in Latin America and Africa, and he served as a senior trade specialist on technical barriers to trade and trade environment issues. And actually, prior to join the WTO, Alejandro Gamboa worked at the Colombian government as Secretary to the Council of Ministers and Secretary General of the City Hall of Bogota, as well as he's well-known lecturer on various trade issues and has been professor for postgraduate studies in various Latin American countries and a member of the International Customs Law Academy. And last but not least, I'm very pleased to introduce you to Carlos Uriarte Sanchez. He is a professor of Rey Juan Carlos University and also Secretary General of Pan-European Spain, member of the Presidency Council of International Pan-European Union, Madrid, Spain. He has been also legal advisor to the European Parliament. He's also a lawyer of the Madrid Bar Association, arbitrator of the Regional Consumer Arbitration Board of the region of Madrid and Madrid City Council. He is also patron of the Peace and Cooperation Foundation and its representative to ECASOS of the United Nations in Geneva and Vienna, and a member of the executive board of independent foundations and advisory council of associations of promoting World Heritage in Spain. He has given lectures in universities in Russia, in Kazakhstan, Macedonia, Uzbekistan, and he's co-author on different papers and books on the European Union integration and Spain participation in the European Union integration and in the international trading system in general. So this is our speakers. I'm very grateful for your participation, and let's start our discussion. So, the structure of the roundtable will be the following. Firstly, we offer the discussion of the questions by our keynote speakers, and then in the end of the whole discussion, we would like to collect questions from the audience. You also actually could write your questions in the chat, and I will collect these questions, and then in the end, we will have time to discuss the questions with you. And the first question for today, Natalia Antonova, please. Yes, thank you very much. So the first question is very important for today is what actually will be the future of international trade policy? So will it be protectionism? And in my view, in the case of the staircase, it's the down side of the staircase, or it will be liberalization. So we go further up in the staircase of international trading system. And why this question come into mind? Because actually the main idea of the WTO and the GATT previously was to support trade liberalization in order to prevent protective policies of the states, and which actually had divided into competing blocks the world in the 1930s and contributed to the expansion of hostility. Today, we again see the escalation of protective measures. Yeah, we see trade wars, imbalances in international trade. Also, Trump policies has forced to rethink actually the current trade agenda. Does it mean that we, in spite of everything, actually need to maintain liberalization initiatives, or we need to reconsider radically, actually, the theoretical background and policies which are now international trade is developing? So, where to go in this third case? In which direction? I will be happy for the involvement in the speakers, as well as there is this, interaction with the audience. I would like to have also a small survey for everyone. So please, Julia, could you start the first question of the survey? Yeah, so you have now on the screen the survey. What will be the future of international trade policy? So please, during the discussion or now answer the question, what you think will be the future of international trading policy? And while you are thinking on the question, on this answer, I would like to give the floor to Sergei Felixovich Sutyrin to start the discussion, to open the discussion. What is your actually view on the future of international trade policy?
Thank you, Alexandra, very much. And also let me welcome all the participants, dear colleagues. Thank you for accepting our invitation to share your wisdom on the issue. And now let me start with a couple of words. I would like, oops, sorry, what's that? It is here. Yeah, let me start. So for me, the main idea of our panel is to invite the participants to reassess our attitude to certain processes and policies that we used to perceive as something generally positive on the balance, in spite of possible or even inevitable negative repercussions of a relative minor scale. This type of reconsideration, at least from time to time, looks really necessary. That appears to be twice as relevant to the period of serious disturbances resulting from various reasons or combination of various reasons. With respect to trade policy, for about 2 centuries, it has been a kind of academic mainstream to treat free trade as clearly preferable modus operandi in comparison with protectionism. And choice in favor of the former fundamentally originates from a variety of economic gains from trade. In addition to that, trade is perceived as a powerful instrument to harmonize the interests of different nations, hence substantially reducing the risk of international conflicts. Great Depression of 1929-1932, as was correctly mentioned by our dear chairwoman, is frequently taken as the most convincing evidence of both economic failure of protectionism and serious threat beggar my neighbor policy presents to the international security. And one could hardly deny that the whole architecture of contemporary international trading system with GATT WTO as its institutional core has been based upon this idea. Now, for about a decade, international community has experienced, as our dear chairwoman put it, escalation of protective measures. Okay, initial stage of this escalation could be explained and even partly justified by Great Recession of 2008-2009. But afterwards, global economy taken as a whole managed to recover at least up to the level of positive GDP growth rate. Of course, pandemic 2020 year is an obvious exception, as well as a very special case, and I believe we will separately focus on that issue a bit later. So back to our ship. Why moderate global economic growth did not result in trade liberalization? With all due respect to international significance of US economy, I definitely can't agree with those who tend to put most of the blame, if not the total one, on Donald Trump. At maximum, he could be portrayed as a symbol, or rather as a top of the iceberg. It might be wrong, but still would bring your attention to what, from my perspective, in addition to other important factors, also matters. Namely, this is a well-known fact that merchandise trade and GDP have grown in tandem for about the last 10 years. Previously, for a relatively long period of time, between dynamics of these indicators, there was roughly twofold gap in favor of trade. The gap resulted in gradually increasing share of the products being consumed in countries other than the countries of their manufacturing. According to some estimates, this share by the end of the first decade of 21st century equal to at least 70%. Could it expand still further? Most probably not. So if this 70% roughly constitute some kind of an upper limit, then there is no alternative to above-mentioned growth in tandem. In my opinion, national decision makers didn't pay enough attention to this constraint, expecting foreign trade of their countries to regain previous dynamics. And not just expecting, but also trying to bring it back by various protectionist measures. This means that as long and unrealistic, from my perspective, hopes regarding possible trade growth rate do not vanish, there are extra incentives to rely upon protectionism. Meanwhile, according to new estimates from the WTO, the volume of merchandise trade is expected to increase this year by 8%. At the same time, the April edition of International Monetary Fund World Economic Outlook sees the global economy grow by 6% this year. By the way, instead of comparing growth rate of merchandise trade with that of GDP, let me remind you that more than 60% of GDP now consists of services. One probably should look at growth rate of industrial and agricultural production to compare with growth of merchandise trade. And the last comment, some experts sensibly claim that President Biden administration have repudiated much of its predecessor policies, but with one exception, namely in the arena of trade. And the reason for that is following. Biden is facing no pressure from a left wing of the Democratic Party to revert to the status quo on free trade. And at the same time, he could open himself to criticism from the Rust Belt voters if he reverses Trump trade agenda. Thank you for your attention.
Sergey Felixovich, thank you very much. And I would like to give the floor to Professor Desiree Van Gogh to continue the discussion about the future, actually, trajectory of the international trade policy. What is your opinion? Do you agree or disagree with Sergey?
I'm afraid I agree, but thank you, Alexandra. And it was very interesting to listen to my colleague, who I respect so much. Yeah, I guess it may be I may be a bit biased. In my opinion, we need to continue focusing on liberalization initiatives. And why do I say I'm biased? Because I come from a country, the Netherlands, that has greatly benefited from global trade, right? And given the size of our home country, we are also strongly dependent on the international playing field as such. However, I think it's not just important for a country like the Netherlands to maintain our focus on liberalization of markets. I think if you look at history due to liberalization, also a lot of other countries, including developing countries, have made a big leap forward to engage in international trade. And to a certain extent, it has enhanced much the needed change in their trade structure, meaning that they moved up the value chain through a rise of being against more medium and high skilled and technology-based products. And I think that is just so vital for the future of any economy, and to move up the value chain of those global value chains. So if we want this development to continue and really build on these sustainable value chains with inclusive growth, not just for countries like the US, Russia, China, and all the European countries, I think liberalization is crucial. And next to that, I think we need to focus on getting especially the category of least developed countries moving up that value chain, the global value chain, so that they get more involved in higher value add activities in the chain. I think we should realize that value doesn't only have a financial and economic dimension, but importantly, a social dimension as well. And these dimensions are very important for making value chains sustainable, but I think in the end also for global trade that is inclusive. And I see that really also as a responsibility for all stakeholders involved. And I totally agree with Sergey that it is not just about, putting the blame on one government or one person. I think it's a responsibility of all stakeholders involved. And I guess it all starts by acknowledging the interdependence between all of us, and that you cannot treat countries or let's say regions as standalones. I think we have arrived, whether we want it or not, but at the stage that global interconnection is a fact, and interdependence of value chains, even after this pandemic and during this pandemic, is a fact. And when we take out one domino of that chain, there is a chance that the entire structure will fall, and that the poorest countries then will suffer most. So in my view, we should take global interconnectivity and liberalization as a starting point when we think about sustainable value chains and making new trade policies. So in contrast with what we actually see happening in the developed world, where we focus now on our, let's say, own sustainability issues and exercise also protectionism, often coming from the fear of losing jobs or the wish to gain geo-competitive advantages, buying time to bridge the technology gap when other countries are ahead of the technology curve. So I think in this time and age, it's important, that is actually an important driver for protectionism, and it's the desire to have the technological superiority to dominate the international market. So for me, building sustainable value chains requires that developed countries and the companies originating in those countries, that they increase their share of responsibility and shouldn't focus only on their own goals and using protectionist measures whenever it suits their situation best. If there's one thing this pandemic shows is how important liberalization is to, for example, to enhance equal distribution of essential goods, the vaccines, the medical devices, they are critical to treat people. It's a given, and it seems that sometimes the developed world is not realizing that unequal distribution of vaccines is not only unfair, but due to economic interdependencies, there will also be a significant damage that puts decades of economic progress at risk for developed and developing countries alike. We all know that when economic progress is put on hold, social progress is in decline, something we cannot afford to let happen. We can not call ourselves successful and triumph over our economic recovery after this pandemic in a world that fails with rising inequality between countries. So liberalization, I think, resulted in the past in new connections to global value chains of countries that needed it most. And as a result, some of the world's population has risen above the poverty line. And some of the least developed countries have become more of producers, have expanded their roles in the playing field of international trade. Versus only being the consumers. So I think it's our responsibility to take this progress to the next level. And perhaps above all, I think we should be aware that this is not an academic discussion. The consequences of our actions, of the lack of it, it's felt by people who either have no access to vaccines or lose their jobs when companies reassure their activities to their home country after years of benefiting from the labor in those vulnerable countries. So in that sense, liberalization or protectionism are not just two words, not just two scenarios, random scenarios. Whatever choice we make, it's impacting people in different countries in a big way. So it's a plea for liberalization, Alexandra. Thank you.
Desiree, thank you very much. You touched very important issues about the development of GVC. And just before to go to another speaker, I would like to share with you the results of the survey. Yulia, could you please show the results for everybody? Yulia, покажите, пожалуйста, результат. Yes, so the audience today are more thinking about that protectionism will be the future, even that you see that the differences between those who are in favor and those who are against are not so big one, but still we see that even that, as Desiree said, liberalization is one of the issues for the GVC development and social dimensions issues. But still, we see that their audience are more thinking that the futures that, unfortunately, will be the protectionism way. Let me introduce the next speaker. Thank you very much.
Alexander, sorry for interrupting you.
Yeah.
How could it be that the sum is more than 100 of the results of a survey? That is 49 for liberalization and 56 for protectionism. The sum is more than 100. How can it be?
That is called magic.
Yeah, it's technological issue. Yeah, but still you see the number of the people. Okay, yeah, Sergey, thank you very much. Yeah, but I see also the number of the people. So 22 is for protectionism and 19 for liberalization. So still we see that 3 people more we have in favor of protectionism. Yeah, but that's interesting question. We will speak about the technology and their effect on our life. And this, Yulia, thank you very much. Could you close the results? Yeah, Alejandra, what is your view on such a results of the survey and on what actually Sergey and Desiree shared with us, please?
Well, first of all, I would like to thank the University of St. Petersburg and also you, Alexandra, and also my good friend Olga Trofimenko for having invited me to address this audience today. I also would like to say hello to some former colleagues that I see on the screen. with regard to the result of the survey, let me start something what we normally used to say in my country of origin, Colombia, and is the following: the statistics show that the statistics are mistaken. So that's why perhaps we have these two different results. Yeah? Well, with regard to the issue of where are we going to liberalization of protectionism, I think we have to address this issue from many perspectives. If we look at the history of the WTO, not only the WTO itself, but also the GATT, since the multilateral trading system started to operate and be operational, there was a reduction from 30 or 35% of tariff duties for goods up to 8%. So this is a significant issue, and this is what we currently have. However, when we look in the case of goods, the difference between the industrial goods and the agricultural goods, there is a difference because, as you might remember, in the GATT, agriculture was not part of the tariff negotiations. It only came within the WTO. And when doing so, what members did was to introduce what they call the tariff escalation, which means that most of these subsidies and helps and supports that were provided for agricultural goods were counted as part of the duties that were going to be applied and that are indeed being applied to the agricultural goods. So that makes a big and important difference between these two kinds of goods. Because on one hand, you will see that there are, since the GATT was established, there have been up to today many, many years of tariff negotiations and reductions with regard to industrial goods. But this has not been the case, unfortunately, with the agricultural goods. And this was one of the main issues that was discussed during the Doha round as to how to make an equilibrium, a balance between the reduction in industrial goods that have being the subject of many tariff reductions, but not the case of the agricultural goods. So this is something that we have to bear into account. However, if we continue in that trend, there was also, and thanks to Article 24 of the GATT, a raise of many regional trade agreements and free trade agreements, which indeed they are allowed by the WTO. And we can count more than 200 regional trade agreements signed on goods and some 180, something like this, in goods and services. This could be worrisome. But when you take that into account, you also have to consider that all these three regional trade agreements, as well as the free trade agreements, the baseline to start negotiations will always be the WTO rules and principles. So this is something that it is good. If you look also at these regional trade agreements, even though they provide some preferential tariff treatment to the participants in such agreements, on the other hand, you will see that they are very interesting because they also contain some new elements that the WTO has not addressed and was not able or in a position to address even in 1947 and nor in 1995. And here we are referring to issues of competition. We are referring also to issues as e-commerce and how it has evolved, also the issue of the MISMIS, all issues that now are being considered within the context of the WTO since the 11th Ministerial Conference in Buenos Aires, where some joint statement initiatives were signed and launched in this regard. So all in all, we can say that the system has being working properly, that the WTO has made its job. For instance, I also would like to point out that the downturn in world trade, which WTO economists originally feared for 2020 was not as sharp as originally forecast. Indeed, trade in merchandise goods declined by 5.3% last year, when compared to the 9.2% drop projected in the WTO revised forecast for October 2020. So this is a significant issue, and we are talking about a situation under the pandemic. So this is important to bear in mind. And the trade forecast for 2021 foresees an 8% increase in trade in goods. And this is also being fueled, even though with the pandemic, to be with a strong rebound in many parts of the world. And for instance, just to cite one case, the large fiscal injections made by the United States to its economy should also stimulate other economies with Asia's exports also like to expand as a result of these fiscal injections made to the US economy. So as we were talking here before, my predecessors, it's something that is interconnected and we cannot see it alone. But on the other hand, this black zone that is the pandemic, because nobody was expecting to it, in this regard, I also, and perhaps we will have the opportunity to address it further later on, is how the WTO has been responding to the pandemic. And this is something that is very important because there is a lot of notifications that have been made by members. So the WTO continues to have this important role of improving transparency and through transparency, addressing predictability, which is something important. So here we have to bear in mind different aspects. On one hand, we have the tariff liberalization. The WTO has been made or has made an excellent job with regard to industrial goods, is going to do and hopefully one day something similar with regard to agricultural goods, but has also liberalized services and some different measures that have also been taken under the TRIPS agreement, or that at least are being proposed by members in this regard. But at the same time, now the way in which the world is trading has changed a lot. And in that, the new technologies have a lot of influence. And this is something that we also have to bear in mind, because I think we should avoid this picture of the international trading system like Jorge Luis Borges, the famous Argentinian writer and philosopher who passed away and lived for many days in Geneva, says in one of his mythological stories, the Goofus bird. We cannot continue seeing at the organization like the Goofus bird, who is a bird that flies ups and down and flies backward, because he's more interested on from where he comes from rather than where he's going to. And this is something that is important, and I would like to just to mention that in order to indicate that there are new challenges that I put in front to the multilateral trading systems. And these challenges are due precisely to the new IT developments and how IT tools, and especially during the pandemic, have demonstrated that they are efficient, but at the same time are putting a lot of challenges to the multilateral trading system and the way in which we trade. Because with them, we will face a lot of difficulties. Difficulties, for instance, in the logistics, in the global value chains, difficulties in the risk assessment, because now the risk is increased not only by the number of parcels that are being traded thanks to e-commerce, but at the same time, because of the origin of the goods, because in the end, you don't know to whom and where you are finally buying the goods that are crossing your borders. Before, we were used to have big containers containing the same kind of goods traded from one well-known exporter or importer, but nowadays we don't know. So there are many, many challenges in which we also have to take into account the validity of the system, and not only framing it about liberalization and protectionism. Of course, many measures, and I hope to have the opportunity to address them later, have been taken by many members with regard to the pandemic. But at the same time, many facilitating measures have been addressed in that regard. And if we look also at the validity of the system, we also have to bear into account the negotiations that took place and the liberalization and agriculture in 2015, but also two more important elements that we have always to consider. That is the agreement on trade facilitation on one hand, and on the other hand, the second version or second liberalization of the ITA agreement. But I think with that, I have said a lot, and I will grant the opportunity to other speakers to address this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. You actually touched a very important issue about it's not only the question of the national policies, but also the issue of regional trade agreements and WTO, how to capture the nowadays challenges in the international trade. And I would like to give the floor to Carlos to share your view on the future of the international trade policy. Please, Carlos.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the invitation to the University of St. Petersburg and the Faculty of Economics, and especially to Professor Alexandra Koval. Well, the different professors that they have done already the contribution, they have different approaches to the same topic. For example, in the case of Professor Sutirin, he spoke about economical issues and the concept of protectionism, multilateralism. Professor Van Korp talked about these social implications of the global and the trade. And Professor Gamboa concentrated more in the issues of the World Trade Organization. I'm from Spain. I'm a specialist in European Union issues. Then I'm going to concentrate also my explanation more about the European Union. Thus, in this regard, well, of course, we need to strengthen liberalization in trading policies. This is the answer to the question. Protectionism is never an answer. Sometimes protectionism is necessary for example, key sectors or strategic sectors in every country. And of course, for example, if the European Union wants to be a relevant actor in the trading and in the global arena, it needs also maybe to pay attention to some key and strategic sectors. But of course, the general idea is that the European Union support clearly the multilateral trade, and the multilateral trade must be protected. And in this regard, for example, closed in January 20, the European Union-China Global Agreement on Investments. Why? To have a common approach as European Union countries to the issue of trading with China, because otherwise, without this agreement, maybe every member state would try to sign bilateral agreements directly with China, and it would be also bad for the European Union and for its unity. Then, for this reason, if we talk about international trading, taking into consideration that we must respect the norms of the WTO, and that the European Union support the WTO, we need as well to work in a multilateral trade framework through multilateral agreements as well that respect these WTO norms. As a sign of the European Union's willingness to strengthen its trade ties, for example, with Southeast Asia, especially with China as well, after having suffered such a dramatic process of rupture as Brexit, and taking the most recent official communications as a reference, last 18 February, the European Commission presented its trade strategy for the coming years, a strategy that aims to bring the European Union closer to the US after Joe Biden's arrival in the government and to counteract the strength of China. The trade project is based on European Union's openness to contribute to economic recovery by supporting ecological and digital transformations. It emphasizes strengthening multilateralism and reforming global trade rules to ensure that they are fair and sustainable. In this regard, the challenges we face require a new European Union trade policy strategy, and we need to open a rules-based trade to help restore growth and job creation after COVID-19. And as well, trade policy must fully underpin the green and digital transformation of our economy and lead global efforts to reform the WTO. And in this communication of the European Commission, in this strategy, its new trading strategy, it was based on three basic concepts: the concept of openness, the concept of sustainability, and the concept of assertiveness, with three complementary objectives: support the recovery, as well support the ecological and the digital transition, and to shape a more sustainable, also fairer globalization and give to the European Union greater capacity to pursue its interests and defend its rights. The European Commission therefore puts sustainability at the heart of the new trade strategy for a climate-neutral, sustainable economy. In addition, Europe will take a straighter and firmer approach to implementing and enforcing its trade agreements, combating unfair trade and addressing sustainability concerns. In this regard, the European Commission plans to bring forward a major reform of the World Trade Organization. The European Commission, at the statement published on February 18, unveiling its new trade policy strategy, with which it seeks to establish a more assertive profile to confront the global duopoly of the United States and China, and to arm itself to retaliate in the event of aggression against European companies. Whoever, Brussels doesn't want to have to resort to such a shield, which in why it intends to tie up an ambitious reform of WTO, because the European Union supports the reform of the WTO. And in this case, for global trade to work, we need the right rules, and these rules are outdated. They don't guarantee a level playing field. They don't respond to the evolving challenges of sustainability and digitalization of the economy. According to the document of Brussels, wants to begin to conclude agreements ambitiously but realistically, according to the communication published 18 of February at the next WTO ministerial meeting next June. One of the priorities is a new system to facilitate global trade in health products, for example, after the pandemic that has exposed vulnerabilities in global supply chains, as for example, Professor Van Gorp mentioned. The European Union, however, also wants to see progress on fisheries, the fight against climate change, industrial subsidies, and also rules for e-commerce. What it means? and as conclusion is that the European Union support liberalization policy, and it's very important to respect as well the norms of the WTO. But also, as Professor Gamboa mentioned, we need to know if the system that we have nowadays is appropriate for the current situations. And in this regard, the European Union support also the reform of the WTO. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Carlos. You raised, on the one hand, you continue to raise very important issue that the international trade policy is not only the issue of national trade policy, but also the multilateral trade negotiations, and the results of multilateral negotiations is important and beneficial for all participants of the international trade. But here we also have the questions which is coming into mind about the gains of different participants of the international trade from the trade and for the economic development. And in this case, I would like to raise actually the second question for the discussion. Natalia Antonovna, please put the presentation on the screen. You also, Professor Van Korp also said about the participation of LDCs and developing countries in the international trading system. Carlos Uriarte Sanchez also mentioned about the EU and China agreement and negotiations. And what is coming into my mind is actually who benefits more from the international trade. Is it actually equal beneficial? And if the international trade is a win-win game or zero-sum game? Natalia Antonovna, could you please demonstrate the question which I would like to put to the discussion? Natalia Antonovna, включите, пожалуйста, слайд. Yes, the second one. So then we are thinking about the climbing the stairs in the international trade. We have different actors, developed countries and developing countries. And the main idea of the GATT was to promote international trade and to have their benefits for all, so in the concept of win-win game. But today, more and more discussants open this question whether actually international trade is a win-win game, or coming back to protectionism idea that it's zero-sum game, and the leading countries in the international trade, they received more benefits and values in comparison with the developing countries in LDCs. So, and what is also important here, and we have raised the questions of global value chains and the sustainable goals. So, is it possible actually to have this sustainable development and to have all countries in the system? So to have to have the cooperation between those who are climbing on the stairs, not to have only competition but also cooperation. I would like to ask also to answer the questions of the audience of the survey. Yulia, could you please open the survey, the second question of the survey? Yes, thank you very much. So please answer the question. And I would like now again to give the floor to the speakers, but could I please ask you just to follow the time schedule, so not more than 5 minutes for your talk. I will say to you and interrupt you, I'm sorry, it's very interesting to hear you, but we need to be in time frame, so please not more than 5 minutes for your talk. And here I would like again to ask to start Sergey Felixovich to give his comments on this topic. Please, Sergey Felixovich.
Thank you, Alexander. But could you kindly switch on? Well, something is I don't know how to do the computer because there is only what we see all on the screen presentation, and I'm not.
Наталья Антоновна, presentation. Наталья Антоновна, выключите, пожалуйста.
If you go to the right section, the view,
Yeah, okay.
you can exit.
No, it's fine.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So it's a very interesting and very relevant question. And from my perspective, it is so deeply connected with the first one that both of them could be perceived as another good example of famous hen and egg problem. Indeed, it could be sensibly argued that whatever deviations of the international trade pattern between alternatives options of win-win and zero-sum game really took place during the last decade, they, to a very large extent, resulted from developments in trade policies implemented by national regulators, both independently and within the framework of international settings. On the flip side, one has enough solid reasons to claim that national regulators did whatever they did, being encouraged or even forced to make respective decisions in order either to support and facilitate or to stop and reverse certain trends in distributions of gains from trade. And if they agree with the claim that GATT WTO system, as well as the whole post-Second World War international architecture, was designed to promote win-win type of international cooperation in general, international trade in particular, then we have to take under consideration some important and, unfortunately from my perspective, often neglected points. I mean that among its implicit origins and pillars, the system had a fresh memory of tragic repercussions of the global military conflict, and B, interaction, or if you prefer to call spade a spade, rivalry between alternative social economic systems, namely so-called socialism and capitalism, constantly challenging and threatening each other. Both of these pillars are largely, not totally, but largely absent today. Meanwhile, under the circumstances of the later, that is, rivalry between alternative systems, both of them, in particular, tried their best in order to arrange trade relations with their economic, political, ideological allies, both real and potential, and within their spheres of influence in as much as possible mutually beneficial way. Talking about possibilities to distribute gains from trade more widely and equally, I would like to start with the fact that international community, de jure, consists of sovereign states. So their leaders, national regulators, first and foremost, have to protect and promote national interests of respective economies, respective countries, haven't they? By the way, from this perspective, I always wonder what is wrong with Donald Trump's slogan, America First? What could be the alternatives? Global prosperity first, democracy first, transatlantic partnership first? Of course not. Equally, for President Putin, Russia is and should be first. For Chairman Xi, it is China, and so on and so forth. Under the circumstances, regardless of internationalization, globalization, and so on and so forth, foreign trade, as well as any other form of international economic cooperation, is by the end of the day just one of the tools to secure robust growth of national economic welfare. The way foreign trade is organized, especially in case of large economies, primarily depends upon internal or domestic priorities, concerns, constraints, and so on and so forth. Here, I can't avoid temptation to refer to the ideas of John Maynard Keynes. Let me remind you that he defined international trade in the period of 1920s, 1930s, I quote, as a desperate expedient to maintain employment at home by forcing sales on foreign markets and restricting purchases. At the same time, this is by all means not a faithful verdict. Keynes argued, again I quote, "But if nations can learn to provide themselves with full employment by their domestic policy, there need be no important economic forces calculated to set the interests of one country against that of its neighbors. So international trade, under the circumstance, tends to become, again I quote, a willing and unimpeded exchange of goods and services in conditions of mutual advantage." Once again, mutual advantage as a result of ability of national regulators to secure full employment at home. It goes without saying that today we do not emphasize unemployment in the same manner as Keynes did. Nevertheless, for me, the parallel in general is quite relevant. And yet another aspect of the problem. I already said that international trade has been traditionally perceived by mainstream theory as a powerful instrument to harmonize the interests of different nations, hence reducing the risk of international conflicts. And this perception strongly correlates with the idea of win-win trade. Unfortunately, reality, at least in a short and medium run, is not that straightforward. Indeed, trade between China and United States, in this case, nowadays, looks like an obvious example. Obvious, but far from being the only one. Look at relations between Russian Federation and Baltic states. On the one hand, for all three of Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Russia is either number 2 or number 3 trading partner after European Union. United States in this field lags substantially behind. On the other hand, in the political sphere, the situation is quite reverse. Similarly, despite the fact that at least during the last 2 years, Russian-American trade performed better than Russian trade in general, political relations between these two countries dramatically deteriorated with no serious connection to any real or potential trade conflict. To conclude, taking under consideration above mentioned economic and geopolitical aspects, I unfortunately tend to be rather skeptical regarding expansion of win-win trade pattern, at least in the nearest future. Thank you.
Sergey Felixovich, thank you very much. I agree with you that the issue is skeptical, but what to do? Yeah, this is an interesting question. So in case of the WTO development, and maybe Desiree Van Gorp, would you like to share with us, are you also so skeptical about the future of the international trade and the benefits for all participants, or you are more enthusiastic about how the development of the international trading system will be?
Thank you, Professor Alexander. And I'm going to try to help you to keep it a bit shorter, because I think if I look at the time, and this is only the second question, I agree with Professor Sergey that, the first and the second questions are very much linked to each other, of course. But if I look at it, I think there are indeed important milestones, that are achieved with the leap forward of some of the developing countries into being really engaged in international trade. But if you look now at the composition in the WTO, I think that has really changed. There is a rebalance of power. But if you really talk about a true rebalancing of power, I think there remains a situation that is still out of balance. And then your question is, can we distribute the gains from trade more widely and equally? And I think that should be then the starting point, looking, okay, we made some progress. There is a bit of rebalancing, but there is still a lot of work to do. And going back to the previous discussion, I think liberalization is an important ingredient to continue actually building on a more balanced distribution of power. I think if you look at the moment, the leap forward of being engaged in international trade for developing countries at least is largely dependent on the progress of countries in Asia. And I think and China stands out there. So as a group, as a group, they have made progress, but if you zoom in on where the progress is, it's really in Asia, and even more, China stands out. So it means there's a lot still to do, and engagement in international trade is, of course, an important indicator for countries' development level. So it's kind of important, and also to have that overall picture rather than specific regions only. So overall, I think we can say that developing countries have made a leap forward, but that's only a part of the story, as that picture is indeed largely dependent on one region, whereas other parts of the world are left behind. And I think for any country, whether in which part of the world you are, it is important that you have what we also discussed in the first round, an inclusive growth. I think that is to the benefit of all countries. And if we want to truly rebalance of power, I think we need to see this as a first phase. So if we see it as a first phase, I'm an optimist. Because then I think, okay, we had the first phase, we move on to the next phase. If we say, well, this was it, this was the rebalance of power, I'm a pessimist, because I don't think we are merely at the end of that road. So I want to take it as that we have a rebalance of power as a first phase, and that we have to move to a next phase where we zoom in on those parts of the world, whether it's Oceania or Africa, that are left behind in this picture that we paint for ourselves. So if we want in that part of the world also to improve their international trade landscape, we need to focus more on differentiated treatment, I think, and special provisions for them. And at the same time, we need to focus more on letting these countries, and again, I come back to the least development ones, really move up the value chains. So basically, I would say, and I conclude with that, it means a reset of international trade policy where there is more solidarity from those ahead of the curve to support the others that are, well, if we look at it, really left behind. So that's where, if we take this as the next phase, I'm an optimist. And the second sort of optimism I can bring in there, that I believe that technology and digital trade can be an enabler to enhance the position in international trade for these countries. Yeah, so I want to leave it at that for the moment.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you very much for timing. I appreciate very much. And I like your idea, and I'm also more positive and optimistic by looking into the future, even taking into account the phases and challenges. And but on the other hand, the issue of special treatment is also opened a lot of discussion today in the WTO. Yeah, so whom to provide, who is more developed, who is less, and so on. And following this idea, I would like to ask Alejandro Gamboa to join this discussion and to give his opinion on the topic. Please, Alejandro.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. I will also try to be as short as possible. Well, it's undoubtedly the multilateral trading system is capital for growth, is capital for development, as is also capital for managing and increasing interconnected global economy. In that regard, I want to refer again to the benefits and the achievements made in the WTO with regard to the ITA, which is providing access at zero tariffs for the ITA goods in the signatories of the ITA agreement, but also, and most important, to the agreement on trade facilitation. Here, if we want to have and see a win-win situation, the agreement on trade facilitation contains a lot of provisions that are showing that we have the possibilities to support the developing world in an excellent manner through this or the implementation of this agreement. First of all, this countries developing and LDCs had the opportunity to indicate the deadlines and the need or not of assistance in order to implement the 12 provisions in the agreement according to their own level of development. So this was important, and we made tremendous exercises on that to help them to support that. But more importantly than that is all the provisions that are there. We count with a National Committee on Trade Facilitation, for instance, that for the first time is putting together all the institutions that have an action at the border to coordinate their activities and to identify what are the procedures that they have. And this is quite important, not only for developing, but also for developed countries, because there will be an identification of all the procedures that you will require to import, export, or even for transit. And with regard to transit, it is very important because the agreement on trade facilitation, especially in most of the African countries, in some Latin American countries, and in a lot of Asian countries that are landlocked countries, there are provisions that will facilitate and ease the trade, whether to export or to import, while facilitating the transit procedures. And there is a big interest among these LDCs, particularly that are landlocked countries, in developing further ideas or implementation of the agreement in that regard. But at the same time, the procedures will be more clear. The procedures will have a tendency to facilitate. However, it is undeniable that the fact of having negotiations to liberalize trade as such does not grant immediately or as a consequence access to new markets for the WTO members, because they continue to be in the need to fulfill certain requirements, like the issues of the technical regulations that are mandatory, or the sanitary and phytosanitary aspects, or the import licensing procedures, and many others. And difficulties also arise for developing and developed countries with regard to how the customs authorities are valuing the goods that are being imported, because there could also be a deviation or a circumvention of the commitments made by all those members. So the agreement on trade facilitation is providing a lot of opportunities to all or the entire WTO membership to have a win-win situation. And in hand with this, the agreement on trade facilitation is also creating opportunities for all members to become paperless. And this is also significant for the environment. And also to have speed procedures and facilitate the global value chains, charging or discharging boats, lorries, trucks, etc., trains, will also make an impact on the environment. So all these things are important. But at the same time, we are here discussing the issues and possibilities for the micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, which is also an important capital, because most of these, especially in the case of the developing countries, will have an opportunity for job creation, will have also the possibilities to develop new products, and will also address one other important issue, which is the gender issue, because that will provide also better opportunities for women to be incorporated, let's say, into the international trading system. We also have here the discussions on e-commerce. We have the work program in e-commerce under the aegis of the General Council, but also to be discussed with 4 bodies entrusted. And it is the case of the Council of Trading Goods, where I am the secretary. And the intensive discussions are taking now place again to address one of the challenges that in the current situation and circumstances the developing countries are also facing, and is the digital divide. So they now, and thanks to the pandemic, are aware that e-commerce is playing a very important role, that digital economy will also be important, so that now they would like to address this issue of the digital divide and also to have transfer of technology in order also to develop not only their networks, but also to be in a better position to have and create new designs, new products, etc., etc.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. You can start about speak about digital development. Maybe we will switch it also to the next questions. And
okay,
would you like to make conclusions or?
Okay, so of course we also have to face here a different issue that my predecessor was she was addressing, is the issue of balance of powers. Here we are also facing some difficulties because there are many actors, but particularly one that is a competitor, but not only this country, there are also other countries, and that's why some members are also pushing to change the status or how to consider whether a WTO member is or is still being a developed country or not. And this is the issue of categorization, which is also a political issue that is very important and has to be considered in order to have a win-win situation and to provide better opportunities to the others. So with that, I think I will conclude, and perhaps I will address some of the remaining issues in a future intervention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. I like very much the idea about the trade facilitation agreement, and I totally agree with you that this is one of the important steps in developing the trade. But unfortunately, it's the let's say I personally expect more agreements in order to be more influence and more impact on the international trade from the perspective of the WTO. But let's discuss it maybe also later. And I would like to give the floor to Carlos. What is your opinion about the situation today in international trade, whether it changed or not in case of this balancing of power? Carlos, please.
Yes, first of all, I would like to say that it's difficult to give a clear answer if now we are in a win-win pattern or not in comparison with 10 or 15 years ago. However, in my opinion, what is true is that now there are more actors, more emergency economies, and many more actors than 10, 15 years ago, which relevant in trading. For example, if we think in Latin America, we must think on Mexico or on Brazil, in Africa, in South Africa, or if we think in Asia, in countries like India, for example, the importance of India nowadays, or countries like ASEAN, it was not so 10, 15 years ago. Then in this regard, there are more countries that they are taking profits of this global trade as before, in my opinion. Then we could say that is a more win-win situation than 10, 15 years ago. However, of course, there are still a lot of countries that they are not taking part of this trading system in the same way, of course. In this regard, Trump left to exercise this leadership in the trading liberalization. And in the time of Trump, we cannot say that there was a win-win situation. Of course not. Okay, it was a bad situation for the whole world. For example, he left to negotiate important trading agreements like the TTIP and the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Agreement, and the TTIP with the European Union. And then China started to exercise a role more and more important in the multilateral level. Now we need to wait what is going to happen with the new American administration, with the new President Biden. But anyhow, we have also these disrupted problems caused by the COVID to the different trading chains, and the COVID has shown that the whole system has a lot of problems. It's not perfect at all. And the future, in my opinion, is going to pass with the necessity of more digitalization and a reinforce of the different regional blocks. And in this regard, I mean, for example, these blocks, they are starting to work more, for example, in the Western Balkans, in Europe, they are trying to create a market for them, or even in Africa, with the African Union. Inside Africa, there are also 4 or 5 also economical integration areas, in Western Africa, in Eastern Africa, and so on. Then it's difficult to answer with a yes or not to this regard. Of course, the trading wars among USA with the Trump administration and China have been very, very strong. But now we are in a point of inflection. The COVID has created a wave of protectionism. But we need to know what is going to happen with the new American administration, because I think that they are going to still also quite protectionism, because also the Democrats, in terms of trading, they are also protectionism. And what is going to happen in the next dates, it's going to be very important for the global governance in terms of world trading, in my opinion. Then we must bear in mind that the European Union is governed by the principles of the World Trade Organization, and therefore there is a firm will to promote the defense of the ideal of free trade with the democratic principles and values that they are characterized in the European Union since its creation. In this respect, the European Union has developed over the last decade numerous policies, plans, cross-cutting strategies with the aim of adapting the new market models transformed by growing technological innovation and new financial trends. We come from a trajectory of trade policy negotiations that culminated in 2016 with the so-called Trade for All strategy, which tried to establish a framework towards a more responsible trade and investment policy. A series of measures were set out that aimed to promote the European Union's efficiency, transparency, values, and negotiating agenda. And well, now we are in a crossroad in this moment. But the future, it's going to be, in my opinion, and with this I will finish, in terms of trading, more cooperation among blocs. European Union, Mercosur, ASEAN, and multilateral agreements among all these international regional organizations. For example, also maybe with the Eurasiatic Union and so on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carlos. Natalia Antonovna, could you show the results of the survey, please? Наталья Антоновна, покажите, пожалуйста, результаты. Thank you very much. So actually, you see here, and now it's 100% in total. I think that the previous result was probably because maybe one person put twice the 2 questions, but now it's 100%, and we see that the audience is more optimistic and in favor of win-win game in the international trade. Could you please show, Natalia Antonovna, the next slide, the 3rd questions? Yeah, So actually, Carlos already touched this issue, not only Carlos, but also Alejandra, and about the COVID-19 and his effect. And what was coming into my mind, so whether the COVID-19 actually is some factors, some markets influence and circumstantial, so it's temporary effect on international trade, or the pandemic actually changed totally or will change actually the international trading system. And I would like to discuss this question and to start also the survey. Yulia, could you please start the survey? Thank you very much. So the question is whether the COVID-19 has the long-term or changes, the holistic changes, or temporary effect is the market changes. And as we are a little bit sorry for my bad management of the roundtable. We have not so many time left, and I also would like to have the questions from the audience. So in this case, I would like to ask, maybe, you know, that we also have the next question. So maybe I will have here two opinions of the from the speakers for these questions who would like to share, and then another two speakers will share their opinions to the next question. So in order to just leave some time for the questions from the audience, because I think that in the discussion with the audience gives more fruitful ideas as well. So who would like to comment this question and from the key speakers, and then we will go to the next question. So please, 5 minutes to the question. So
Итак, мы с вами перейдем сейчас к следующему вопросу. 5 минут на вопрос.
So who would like to?
Итак, кто хотел бы?
Maybe Carlos, would you like to comment, because you already started to speak about COVID-19 in your presentation.
Okay. I will give some ideas. Yes. Unfortunately, regarding the question 3, unfortunately, we are all aware that the new reality that has been imposed on us due to the pandemic that we have suffered and continues to suffer since last year has forced us to rethink our way of life, from adapting to working online and reducing social interactions to modifying the commercial strategy that was developed before the pandemic, which was characterized by a constant trade in goods of all kinds, in which has been reduced by the imperative need to increase trade in health material, for example. According to the experts, the situation is not likely to disappear in short term, and we will have to maintain precautions as much as possible, with the common goal of returning to the situation of economic and social stability that we enjoyed before this health crisis. With this in mind, another important point that I would like to stress is the importance of innovation as an engine for long-term economic growth. As well, in this area, the European Commission's initiative, in line with the World Trade Organization, which proposes the creation of a multilateral agreement on trade in health products as a useful tool for liberalizing tariffs, curbing unilateral export restrictions, and thus facilitation trade regardless of the territory, stands out. Because the pandemic has highlighted the lack of adequate medical supplies, as we have seen, for example, in Spain, and a deep dependence we have in Europe on medical products and supplies, mostly from China. We are aware that the COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the need to strengthen the supply chain in order to guarantee the supply of medicines and other essential products. And we all know that the key to success is to be able to adapt to changing times as quickly as possible in order to provide an effective response to the challenges of modernizing societies. This is why the European Commission has presented a new trade strategy. To achieve its objective is to contribute to economic recovery by supporting the green and digital transformation. And finally, but in addition to this, the fact that we have suffered from this complex situation has made Europeans realize that we need to have our own initiatives to solve future problems. In short, the pandemic has shown that Europe needs to be autonomous. That concept of, for example, the strategic autonomy that the European Union defends at economic, commercial, technological, and security level, but which is, however, mostly produced outside our borders, with digital innovation driving both in the United States and China. Then we should have our own security and defense industry as well, being important the need we have for medical services and health equipment, which since the last year is acute and has modified the trade partners of all countries. I think that, of course, I mean, for the future, the pandemic has changed everything. Because we have noticed that we need to be independent and sovereign, not only in Spain, in Europe, but also every country has noticed how important they need to have a strategic autonomy in many fields, not only in security issues, but for example, in healthy materials with the issue of the vaccine. How is possible? And we have discussed a lot in Europe, in the European countries, this issue, even in the cafeterias and in the restaurants. How is possible that Europe was not prepared to face the pandemic if we are in the so-called first world? Because we didn't have in this time vaccines and the healthy materials to face the pandemic, because these materials, they were produced in China, for example. We cannot depend on thirds. We cannot depend on USA. We cannot depend on China. We cannot depend on thirds. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carlos. Thank you very much. You actually also speak that COVID-19 is not only the issue of health, trade, let's say, but also a lot of on the digitalization and development of the nations. Could I give the floor then to Alejandro, because he also stick the issues of COVID-19 in his previous speech. Alejandro?
Thank you, Alexandra. Just one thing for clarification. Do you want me to address only the issue of the COVID, or you also want me to make a brief reference also to what you mentioned, the IT tools and international trade?
If you could, in 5 minutes, to mention the issue of COVID, but I think that this, as well already Carlos said, this COVID-19 actually boosts the issue of the digitalization and e-commerce. So, which question it's more closer to you, but of course the first and the most important today is the issue of pandemic. Do you think it's a long-term or a short-term effect, and why?
Okay. So I will start with the pandemic and we'll address some of the issues. Well, with regard to the pandemic, the first thing that I have to tell you is that this black zone, unexpected, boosted the new trend for international trade, which was e-commerce. And from there, many challenges arrived, because there were challenges in where to find the goods, how expensive or not they were, if you were a good bidder or not in order to obtain more of these goods, whether or not you will also warranty the national supply of these goods, and also due to the pandemic itself, whether or not the global value chain, but more than that, the logistic chains will be working appropriate in order to distribute the goods, but then also the goods, but also, as Carlos was mentioning, also the raw materials in order to produce some of these goods. So this is important. He also addresses the issue of the pharma. There are some discussions about this. However, there is no tariff classification, or there is not a sector that can be considered as medical goods, because we are not talking only about the issue of the components and the chemicals, but we also can include syringes, we can also include face masks, we can also include artificial respiratory machines, and so on and so forth, even beds for the hospitals, etc., etc. So here we deal with also a difficult issue as to how to frame what is really a health good. But the pharma is one initiative at the end of the Tokyo round, is a very important element. Now, with regard to the COVID, I would like to say shortly that the trade policy responses to the COVID pandemic have been many and have been also very comprehensive. The WTO have recorded more or less over 350 trade and trade-related measures in the area of goods themselves, taken by some 100 members, which include measures that can be restricting, but also measures that can be considered as trade facilitating. The restricting ones were more addressed on the bans for exports, in order precisely to address one of the concerns that Carlos mentioned before, which is to secure the national supply of these medical devices in the country. And the facilitating ones refer to the fact of, for instance, lowering down or eliminating temporarily the tariff duties, or also even taking decisions with regard to the internal taxes, and also to facilitate some of the procedures which is related also to trade facilitation. So I would like to tell you that among the import restrictions, there were notified 127 measures. About the export, about facilitating, import facilitating measures, 127, export facilitating measures, 81, other kind of measures like quantitative restrictions or things like this, or even these duty-free measures, 17, for a total of 225 measures with regard to goods. With regard to the restrictive ones, 6, 109 for exports, and some others 10. All in all, that makes more or less 350. But that took place not only in the case of goods. There were also some measures, almost 124 measures that have been notified under the services area, and which relate to measures to ensure more telecommunications capacity being available to the operators, measures to facilitate access by the population to telecommunications services and online education and health services, which has been one of the important issues during the pandemic. Measures to provide flexibility to suppliers of transport services and facilitate the continued operations as regards cross-border transportation freight, and also lighter requirements imposed by banks, such as having liquidity. But in the same token, under the intellectual property, there have also been some important measures that have been taken in this regard. And now, again, and in order to finalize, Alexandra, I would like to address some of the IT tools and how those are related to the pandemic. The risk has increased because the risk has been dealt, and at the very beginning, it happened with frauds that were operated through online operations. So sales that did not take place, the bad quality of the products, those respiratory devices that did not work properly, bad quality of the face mask, fake chemicals or pharmaceutical or other surgical devices. So this was a challenge because the risk was increased. And this namely because some of these operations took place through electronic means. And in this regards, I would like to point out that thanks also to these electronic means, nowadays the customs authorities and the border authorities, they are doing a lot, thanks also to the agreement on trade facilitation, because they are creating this possibility to put in advance in an electronic form all the documentations for import, export, or transit procedures. Members are making tremendous efforts in order to put in place the single windows that are a very important tool, because there you can find not only all the information related to all the import, export, and transit procedures, but at the same time to lodge in advance in a paperless form all these issues in order also to have a speedy release and clearance of the goods. But in addition to that, many IT devices are being used to control the goods. Now we have excellent scanners that can scan even trucks that are going through the roads at 80 kilometers per hour. We also have those scanners, according to the caliber, that can see what is inside each one of the containers. We also have drones, and we also have the GPS, and we also have the blockchain, which is also a tool that will secure all because we allow all the traceability as from the producer until the delivery of the goods, and which are the actors that are there, and this that would be very difficult to forge and will facilitate a lot. And at the same time, all this information that is being provided, and where there are some fights between the customs administrations and the sanitary administrations as to, and also the stakeholders as to the kind of information that has to be provided, discussions have also demonstrated that the more information you have, the more easier you will be able to determine the risk of not of a certain good. And with that, I finalize my presentation. Thank you, Alexandra.
Thank you very much, Alejandro. So yeah, you actually already make a bridge to the next question. Natalia Antonovna, could you please show the results of the survey? So as you see, the majority of the audience today agree that the effect of the COVID-19 will be long-term effect. And actually this question, as already our keynote speaker already said about it, is connected, is related very much to the digitalization and to the fourth industrial revolution. Natalia Antonovna, could you please show the next slide? And the last but not least, the question which I would like to address to Desiree and Sergey, and then to all the audience to follow the discussion, is actually, does the fourth industrial revolution influence the international trading system in an evolutionary way, or, as you see, just we need to go up to the stairs, or actually we already have an elevator or another type of climbing on the stairs. So it's more revolutionary manner of how the international trading system will develop. Could I ask maybe to start with Desiree, and then Sergey will finalize the...
Sure, Professor Alexandra.
Do you have survey?
I'm happy to
Yes, the survey. Yeah, Yulia, could you please? Yeah, thank you very much, Sergey Felixovich. So yes, and of course, yeah, the survey. I will be grateful for your answers. So, what do you think the audience will be evolutionary or revolutionary effect? Desiree, please.
Yes, thank you, Professor Alexandra. I'm happy to contribute to answering the question you have put forward, a very important question, of course. And I think the fourth industrial revolution influenced the international trading system in a revolutionary manner. And that the institutes such as the WTO were unable to adequately respond to that change. And when I say WTO, I mean the member states who knew the WTO is standing on a burning platform and have not joined forces enough, I think, to prevent the institute to end up in a crisis. And I think it's useless to point fingers to one particular government. I think it's a collective inertia that to adapt to much needed change. And I think, yeah, we have seen the only response we've seen is a trade war, but what we really need is new trade policies, I think, focusing on innovation, technical, logical development. And it's just very sad to see that we are way behind in capturing statistics to capture digital trade activity. And I think it all starts there. And COVID-19 has only accelerated digital trade, yet we are way behind in capturing the level of trade attributed to digital transactions. So I think a recently published IMF working paper words it so accurately: we enter a new era of trade. And we have also the publication that came out of the WTO Chairs Program. Undoubtedly, Professor Sergey and Professor Alexander, you've seen it, edited by Dr. Maarten Smeets, with the title "Adapting to the Digital Trade Area: Challenges and Opportunities." So I think it's a must-read for looking ahead of how we can respond to challenges, and importantly, and I want to sort of end it optimistically, how can we grasp opportunities and make sure we design the policies that are in line with the development of digital technologies, benefiting all and ensuring inclusive growth. I cannot underline that enough, and that is not in the interest of one or particular area, region, country. It is really the collective that is benefiting from inclusive growth. Sometimes you have to give in a little bit on the short term to gain on the long term. So I hope I just hope that we have that long-term perspective. Again, ultimately, it's not about policies. It's really about the people who suffer if we don't take action and live up to the responsibility of making international trade the basis for inclusive growth. Thank you, Professor Alexandra and your university for putting all these important topics on the agenda to have this discussion. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And Sergey, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Alexandra. First of all, let me start with saying that I would largely agree with what was said by my dear colleagues, with Desiree, with Carlos, and with Alejandra. But let me add something from my side also. So from my perspective, in relation to many developments, it is not easy to make a clear-cut distinction between evolution and revolution. Due to largely psychological reasons, we often tend to call specific processes revolutions, trying to highlight their significance, to emphasize new elements they bring, especially at the initial stage of the process. Probably, we also want to add, well, if you wish, some extra flavor of excitement to our day-to-day life. But as time goes by, our attitude could change. What was initially extraordinary peculiarity gradually transforms into routine. Let me give you an example. After publication of general theory, notion of Keynesian revolution have been widely used to describe the way the book influenced Western economic thought. At the same time, it didn't took too long to incorporate new ideas into the core of economics and to provide enough reasons for Milton Friedman to claim we all are Keynesians now. Who knows, maybe it is not in not that distant future, common perception of a leap from what we might describe as Gutenberg galaxy to galaxy of Zuckerberg will experience similar transformation. as we sang in one Soviet song, revolution has a start, revolution has no end. Есть у революции начало, нету революции конца. Now, 2 comments on the impact of digitalization could have on international trading system. Well, first of all, we used to think that digital technologies provide new opportunities for trade to expand both in scope and scale. Yeah, but as they say, there is a skeleton in every cupboard. And in our one, it relates to what in particular is known as 3D printing or additive manufacturing. According to some estimates, the industry is expecting to grow dramatically from less than $10 billion in 2018 up to almost 43 billion by 2025. Very good, isn't it? But to be frank with you, I was greatly surprised to read that this impressive expansion in a bit longer time frame could be a serious threat, since it may wipe out as much as 40% of world trade by 2040. And this is an obvious challenge for national and international regulators. As for statistics, yesterday at our business forum, one of the colleagues provided some data on e-commerce in Russia. And during 2020, it expanded dramatically, but at the same time, trans-border transactions or import side contracted due to a variety of reasons. So you see, it's not that straightforward. And yet another thing, from the point of view of your humble servant, there is a whole bunch of very serious concerns related to digitalization, and starting from so-called digital divide that was already mentioned by Alejandro, with an enormous risk for a large share of national and international entities to lag dramatically behind, and ending with cyber dimension of national security. And it is really the issue taken seriously enough, not only by the leading economies of the globe. Here, all members of international community are currently involved. It is not by chance that in March 2021, a working group within the United Nations, comprising of all 193 of its members, adopted a document which is called Consensus Report on Norms for Responsible State Behavior in Cyberspace. This is just the first step, and definitely further negotiations are doomed to be very difficult and lengthy. Meanwhile, possible escalation of the tension in this field could substantially threaten overall system of international relations. And in this case, trade would also suffer substantially. Of course, let's hope for the better, but by all means, it will not happen automatically. And there is only one way to succeed. And in that sense, I would largely bridge what Desiree said. In order to succeed, we have to be, all of us, we have to be persistent and industrious, or in the words of famous Latin saying, labor omnia vincit. Thank you very much for your attention.
Sergey Felixovich, thank you very much. I see the hands which is rising, but maybe we will make available the results of survey. Natalia Anatolyevna, what is the audience thinking about the impact of the digital revolution? Some people also said not just of revolution. Yeah, that's interesting. That the results, could you please show the results? Natalia Anatolyevna. Yeah, thank you very much. So you see here also there are different views, but the majority of people are thinking about evolutionary manner and not revolutionary one, even that
I would rather call it 50-50 division.
Yeah, but I agree that all the questions actually were very provocative and discussable, of course, because all situation in our everyday life and in the economics in particular, they have not only one assessment and only one way of thinking. And I like very much our discussion because we have different perspective, various view on the questions. And I would like now to collect some questions from the audience. Yeah, we are shortage of time, but as I understand, we could a little bit speak more if the speakers agree to have more than 15 minutes more. Is it possible for everyone to have about?
Yeah, Alexandra, I have no problem. I would like to react because this is the aim of a round table, because I have some issues that will perhaps create some controversy.
Okay.
Yes. No problem to prolong the round table. I think that is better to have also debate with the audience.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much for your answers. And the only issue is that we need to give the rest for our translators. So we will follow the conversation in English, but there was translation into Russian. And I would like to thank a lot the translators for their efforts to provide the translation for the Russian audience. Thank you very much for your tremendous work and support of the event. Yes, and we will follow the discussion in English. So before Alejandro and Carlos wants to share their views, maybe your views will be also as an answers to the questions. So perhaps we try to collect some questions who would like to ask the questions. If I think there are some. So are there any questions? Just 1 second. I see.
There is a question from Daria Chupina.
Yes, Daria, please.
In the chat.
In the chat. Just 1 second. I have some technical issue. Yeah, Daria. Yeah, sorry. So Daria's questions about greening of global economy and trade policy in particular. So she asked if whether you think that global green agenda will result in more fair policy and liberalization, or we will see a new spike in green protectionism. So very interesting question. Thank you very much, Daria. Dear speakers, would you like to comment these questions? Who would like
could you please repeat it?
So the question is about greening of global economy and trade policy in particular. So whether global green agenda will result in more fair policy and liberalization, or it will result in new or continuing protectionism and the green protectionism, actually.
Okay, in this regard, I mean, the European Union has taken a lot of interest on green economy. And for example, the European Union supports highly the agreement of Kyoto and the agreement of Paris. And in this regard, it's important that the whole international community, they join these initiatives, because if we want to build a better world, more green and more sustainable, it's necessary that we play all with the same rules. Because of course, if we want to grow in the European Union with green and digital elements, but others, they are not having the idea of how important it is to protect the environment, and they produce pollution, then what we do, maybe, because I mean, this is an important topic also that we are focusing in Europe. It's the green economy so crucial and important for the recovery, for example, of the European Union, because we have an economical crisis, and we are going to use the green economy and the digital economy as the two vectors to recover the European Union economically. And of course, digital is not doubt, but the green economy, some people and some specialists and experts, they say, okay, we are going to grow so much with the green economy, or maybe because we want to work for that, other actors, like for example, China or others that they don't support, or Brazil, for example, that they don't support so strong the green economy, they are going to grow more than us because they are going to play with different rules. And then the fair play, the play is not going to be fair play. Okay, this was only just some comments.
Thank you very much, Carlos. Somebody else from the speakers who also would like to comment?
May I?
Yes, please, Alejandro.
Do you want me to react first to the previous question or respond directly to the question posed by Daria?
Firstly, respond to Daria's question, please.
Okay, less controversial. Well, thank you, Daria, for these questions. Of course, if you look at the multilateral trading system, the environment has been, or you can find it in the preamble of the Marrakesh Agreement. So it is related to trade, and it is related to development. Now, the issue is how to make it pertinent, how to implement this. Here in the WTO, as you may be aware, we have discussions on trade and environment, but more important than that, we have already had important disputes related to environment. The first dispute that came to the WTO was precisely on the reformulated gasoline, the case Venezuela against the United States. And then we can also mention another one, which is the shrimp and turtle. And now it's being discussed a very important issue, which is the carbonated tax that is being proposed by the European Union, where some members have a lot of concerns that this has been brought last week to the attention of the Council for Trading Goods, where namely the countries such as the Russian Federation or the Middle East countries raise some concerns, and some Middle Asian countries raise concerns about how the EU intends to put in place such a mechanism, and particularly how are they going to measure the emissions of carbons in those whole processes, and also some others have joined them in asking them if they are going to apply also some issues with regard to the transportation of some goods that they won't harm the environment due to carbon emissions, but perhaps that during the transportation being in developing countries and being made through trucks that perhaps do not fit the EU and US standards on environment can also harm the environment. So those are important issues that are being discussed in the WTO, and closely related to that also the discussion with regard to the biofuels. I know that currently there is a request for consultations. I don't remember exactly, this Malaysia or Indonesia against the European Union, particularly for the palm oil biofuels and the use of palm oil. So just to mention to you that the issue is being addressed. The problem is that anyhow, all the WTO members have, and all of them recognize the rights that the WTO membership have to enact or put in place rules that will protect the human health, animal health, plant health, and also the renewable resources, among them the environment. The issue has been raised, and notifications on that have been indicated under the agreement on import licensing, under the agreement on technical barriers to trade, under the agreement on sanitary and phytosanitary measures. And the main element is how the architecture of soft measures or the design of soft measures be compliant with the WTO rules and regulations on that hand. But only the architecture is not sufficient, is not enough. The architecture comes accompanied by the application of the measures. So sometimes you can find that there are measures that are WTO consistent, but that in their application for practical reasons because of the different technologies, and that could be, for instance, to cite an example, the shrimp and turtle case, they were not appropriate to all the rest of the WTO membership. So the issue is being addressed. The issue of how to spread the benefits of the multilateral trading system in accordance with the Sustainable Development Goals is also a capital issue for the WTO members. With that, I stop my issue. Can I continue to react or not? Because I have this in my mouth and I don't know, I will have a hernia.
Alejandro, maybe I will give the floor in the end, of course, to each speakers to make some.
There won't be translation, and I think it's important to have translation.
Yeah, the issue is that yeah, the translator is already.
Okay, so continue. So continue because we are.
Let's continue on this question. Sergey Felixovich, you would like also to answer the question? The microphone is.
Yeah. Thank you, Alexander. Well, I will be very short because I would largely agree with what Alejandro said about the significance of actual implementation. We all know that devil is in the details. And from that perspective, green issues or environment issues, they are not different dramatically from what we have with respect to TBT or SPS, the same story. It might be used in order to protect, and it might be used in order to just to justify some good and mutually acceptable reasons. And yet another thing with respect to some ambiguity, if you wish, of the problem relates to the fact that we are not that sure, or we can't be 100% sure that all the recipes we suggest now, in particular including renewable energy, they are environment friendly. In particular, quite recently, I read a paper on comparative costs or environmental costs of plastic bags and paper bags. And the author argued, of course, he might be totally wrong, that in case of plastic bags, overall costs on environment are less in comparison with what we have in case of paper bags. And similarly, many other instruments we consider today as a good instruments to promote environmental friendly, whatever, patterns or modus operandi, they are not that definitely environmental friendly. Thank you. That's the end of my intervention in that case.
Thank you very much, Sergey. So, are there any comments or questions from the audience, please? So I do not see any rising hands. Yeah. So maybe in this sense, we will make some summing up from the speakers, and as Alejandro and Carlos would like to add, please, not so a lot. Yeah, some general, most important thing which you would like to share and to sum up after the discussion. So okay. Please.
Okay, thank you. Well, no, just a quick reaction to Professor Van Gorp and also to Professor Sutirin with regard to the last questions as to how the issue is being addressed at the WTO. I think the issue is being addressed. All these issues are being addressed and are being discussed, and the WTO is providing a forum for the whole membership to discuss. We have the work programs on e-commerce since 2008. There have been some political issues that did not allow the discussions to take place, but now you have the GSI, and we continue to have the discussions on the work program, and we are discussing also about the extension of the moratorium or to make it permanent for on customs duties for electronic transmissions. There are, of course, many challenges, not only about the digital divide, but also many concerns by many members, not only LDCs and developing countries, about the data storage and the use of those data, and also about the consumer's protection, consumer protections on both sides, how the consumer will be protected with the use of the data that they have on the consumer. Remember that each time you have something for free in the internet, you are not the customer, you are the product. Yeah? And also with regard to the issue of the revolution or not. The revolution here are the breaking technologies. The evolution is how to incorporate these breaking technologies to our daily lives, and also how this can be and have to be addressed by the multilateral trading system. So the issues come first. The fourth industrial revolutions and all the advantages came first. Now the issue, they have their own pace, dear Professor Van Gorp. Yeah, so they will be incorporated when there will be the appropriate time to do so. But the discussions are being taking place in the WTO. This is what I wanted to say in short, and this is the aim, with due respect, and also thanking you because you encouraged me to say that. Now, with regard to all, thanks a lot for this invitation. Has been very interesting. I think that the multilateral trading system has its validity, is facing very many challenges. There are many aspects. Some of them of substance, some of that could be more administrative, that has to be addressed in the context of a WTO comprehensive reform. Some other issues can also come here, not only the issue of the appellate body and the issue of how the judges will take place, but there are many substantive issues that are coming here. We are addressing and we are doing our work. Proof of that is what we have indicated and what I have been in a position to indicate to you. Transparency is coming as a key pillar, not only of the multilateral trading system, but also an important part of the WTO reform, because transparency is the only thing that will provide predictability in order for us to trade in a better manner. Now, how we are going to reallocate things, Carlos was also referring to the fact that countries will have to rethink and be self-sufficient. In the current days, I see it very difficult, perhaps creating channels or perhaps creating some other kind of negotiations, not only negotiations dealing necessarily with liberalization. Now we need also a regulatory framework, and this is quite important. Do not stick on Article 28 bis of the GATT that we need to launch periodic renegotiations on tariff liberalization. We also need some more regulatory frameworks that will allow this House to respond with the principles that have been agreed and then remain valid: the most favored nation, non-discrimination, transparency, predictability, and so on and so far, to respond to the challenges and to the new changes that the world, the real world, and economic and also technology is providing to us. Also, the black swan like the pandemic. Thank you very much, and I hope and look forward to continue participating if you invite me in the future to participate in one of these events. Thanks a lot, and thanks also to us, and with due respect to Professor Van Gorp and also to Professor Sotirin and to Carlos, I really was delighted, and you mentioned most of the issues that I wanted also to raise, or some of the issues, and you made that in a better form than I did. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
I would like also to,
yes, Carlos?
to mention a bit regarding the question for a reaction, that the fourth industrial revolution focused on cyber physical systems, robotics, the Internet of the Things, the connection between devices and the cooperative coordination of the economy's production units. These have materialized in the increasing importance of robotics, artificial intelligence, drones, and the 3D printers, and the greatest advances in recent years, which are expected to modify different aspects of our current societies, are such as medicine, high precision industry, and labor relations, will be significantly impacted by the new industrial revolution. In this regard, I would like to mention as well that answering if there is evolution or revolution, in my opinion, there is a revolution, a big revolution. And for example, we don't know what is going to happen with the translation of goods, for example, in the next 15, 20 years. Because, for example, goods and products, they can be produced in the future in 3D dimension. And many products, they are going to be produced in an artificial way. Even maybe the meat is going to be produced and food. In this regard, for example, also the perfection of the augmented reality. It's going to be a problematic, for example, for the tourist sector, because if you have the augmented reality with good conditions and you have the same feelings through the augmented reality without needing to travel to Egypt, then you are not going to travel to Egypt. If you are having the same feelings that you are seeing the pyramids without being there, for example. And in this regard, we must still wait what is going to happen with the market when the fourth revolution is already established, because we are now in this process. But for example, in this regard, I wanted to make a reflection to the professors and to the public. What is going to have to happen, for example, with the Silk Road Initiative? Because the Silk Road Initiative, which is, as you know, the biggest program of China, it's been created with the old formula, with the old ideas, and not taking into consideration the fourth revolution. And maybe even the Silk Road Initiative is going to be obsolete in 10 years or in 15 years, because they are not adapting these ideas to the new situation that we are now creating in this moment. Then we need to reflect about that. And finally, I would like to make also a conclusion. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the need to strengthen the supply chain in order to secure the supply of medicines and other essential products. We all know that the key to success is to be able to adapt to changing times as quickly as possible to provide an effective response to the challenges of modernizing societies. This is why the European Union has presented, for example, in the new trade strategy, and to achieve its objective is to contribute to economic recovery by supporting the green and digital transformation. We don't know if we will be success in the European Union with this, but this is idea. European associations has reached to the document, welcoming some of the points and calling to some aspects of its implementation to be strengthened. The whole European governance must therefore be reviewed in order to make it more legitimate, more democratic, more efficient, and more rapidly implemented. And finally, I would like also to express my gratitude for the invitation to the St. Petersburg University and to the World Economic Department and Faculty of Economics, and to Professor Alexandra Koval, and to the other colleagues who share with me the roundtable today, to Alejandro, to Professor Van Korp, and thank you very much also for the attenders that they spent more than 2 hours hearing us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carlos. Thank you.
Spasiba.
Oh,
Okay. Desiree, Sergey Felixovich, would you like to have to?
ladies first.
Yes, I'm hesitating because I have to lecture in actually I have to get out of the meeting, so I will just listen to Professor Sergey for the last words that I can attend that. Thank you. But I want to thank you all because I think it's very the topics you have raised, I think, made me also rethink and restructure my thoughts. I thank you for that. I think the St. Petersburg University, you, Professor Alexander Koval, Professor Sergey, really appreciated the invitation, and to have such eloquent colleagues here at the panel. Carlos, Alejandro, really thank you so much for the invitation and for the time you gave us.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Desiree, that you joined our discussion. And it was very valuable contribution from you and from all the speakers. Sergey Felixovich, would you like to have your words?
Thank you. Thank you. Basically, what I would like to say, these are the words of gratitude to the participants of panel discussion. In particular, I myself learned a lot from your wisdom, and your ideas provided some kind of new impulse for me to think about all these very relevant and very interesting issues. And I do believe that we'll be able to continue our cooperation under the umbrella of WTO Chairs program, or more generally. And I also think that the audience, largely consisting of our students, they benefited a lot from this type of discussion. And I believe it would be fair to express our common gratitude to our moderator, Alexander. It was a great job from my point of view. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And I actually would like to thank people who you didn't see, but who helped me a lot, also from my technical issues. So I would like to thank Yulia from PR department of our St. Petersburg State University, who actually make these technical issues with the survey. It was my idea, but I am very happy that we installed this, and I was very interested to see the results of your answers for the surveys, as well as I would like to thank Natalia Anatolievna Navrodskaya, who is the coordinator of the conference and who helped me a lot today with the presentation as well. Thank you very much, Natalia Anatolievna. And I would like to thank so much the keynote speaker. I have so many ideas. It's actually my first panel at such a level, and I thank you very much for the participation, for your ideas. And I actually, in my mind, I put on the list that I need to see again it in YouTube and to collect again the ideas and to listen to your speech in order to maybe to introduce some new thoughts and new improvements. Thank you very much for the audience, and I hope we will continue to be in contact and continue our research on such an important issue as in development of international trade and economic development in general. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, so we are finishing our conference, and please see the program. We also have a lot of sessions today on the different issues, and we will be happy to see you at these sessions. Thank you very much. Have a nice time today.
Thank you very much. It was interesting. Goodbye.
Bye.
Я сейчас поставлю заставку для YouTube. Спасибо большое.